Welcome everyone to this session, which is on the 5 habits of innovative councils. And just a bit of context from me. And in case you haven't met me before, I'm Eddie Copeland. I'm from the Lottie team. And recently, Lottie has been going around to some of our member boroughs, that's now 28 of you across London, talking to their leadership teams and trying to say, what is it at a leadership level we need to get right for their organizations to have a fighting chance of delivering the kind of innovation that many of you will engage with us on regularly and will be a core part of your jobs. As we start that, I'll just share my favorite leadership quote, which I stumbled on LinkedIn yesterday. Perhaps you saw it too. It's this one: a leader is someone who is fed up with the status quo and has the energy to do something about it. I like it because it feels action orientated. It feels like it describes so many of you that I've met. You're the ones with the energy, wading through the bureaucracy, trying to get great things done. And also, it's not just about the leadership team, it's leadership that all of us practice, whatever our level within our organizations. Now, of course, when we're talking about sort of what innovation can do, we also are mindful, particularly when we're talking to leadership teams, but this may feel true of many of you as well, that people have been a bit jaded by innovation. They might feel a bit burnt by it. They've, had the consultancy promise and felt let down by it. So if you're not a fan of innovation, if your colleagues aren't a fan of this term innovation, what we often say is like, what we're actually here to talk about is, what does it take to be a really high performing organization? What does it take to deliver fantastic services? And what does it take to navigate endless change as a resource constrained organization? Because this is our reality, as we know, in local government. And so if we're not keen on innovation, it's shorthand for all of those things, which I think everyone cares about. And of course, our context, we're meeting in incredibly difficult times. We know right across London, local authorities, after 14 years, are still year on year making multi-million pound cuts. And we know we get sucked often into these rather soul-sapping conversations around where do we cut next? And the Lottie argument, and I think our community's argument, has to be that the conversation needs to be bigger than that. Of course, we've got to make the savings where we can, but also, if we're still going to be around 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, we've got to think in a different way, and innovation has a role in that. And one of the quotes I like to share most is actually paraphrasing a guy called Neil Crowther. Some of you will have seen me share this quote before, but he essentially says public services are not only underfunded, they're also under-imagined. They're not only underfunded, they are under-imagined. And I think, again, when we're talking to our organizations, challenging people to say, hand on heart, if you could design your corporate service or your customer facing service from scratch today, would you design it the way it is now? And whenever we ask that question, nearly the whole room is going, well, we wouldn't. Okay, well, then there's room to reimagine, there's room to do things differently. And what we need is some tools to be able to do that. So today is about how do we do that reimagining process. Final bit of context before I get into the content itself is to say, sometimes when we've delivered this, people have come up to me afterwards and said, well, Eddie, this is just common sense. And I point out to them, well, if you visit the local authorities up and down this great country of ours, you will find there is a giant, great pile of common sense that we leave at the office door. We turn up to work. I don't know if you agree with me. You can give me the virtual thumbs up if this resonates at all. That we turn up to work and things that we would think were completely insane in our private lives, we're encouraged and incentivized by our organizations to do these bizarre behaviors that in many cases just aren't working. And in part, we need to call out that the emperor has no clothes here. And there might be a different way of doing things. And again, whenever we say this, people are nodding away. So collectively, who is it who's enforcing the behaviors that aren't working? There's a sort of honest conversation we need to be having with ourselves. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about the anti-habits. We're talking 5 habits, but I'm going to talk about the anti-habit first. What is it? What are those behaviors and habits that maybe aren't working in the way that perhaps they once did and need to now? And then we'll flip it around on each one to what are we saying is the positive habit that we'd like to advocate. And I want to begin with this one. Do you recognize this behavior? We write a big strategy setting out the solutions, and then we try to deliver them in a huge change program. And this feels very common in our discussions right across local government, that this is a very common approach to things. And with this, I'd ask us to pause for a moment and just ask you to think about, can you think of any other type of organization in any other sector where the organisation is the size of a local authority that has to deliver, that has to engage with and deliver in the level of complexity that you all do? Is there any other organisation as small as a local authority that deals with the level of complexity you do? You deliver hundreds of completely unrelated services. You are responsible for more than 1,000 statutory responsibilities. You are at the coalface of tackling some of the biggest, thorniest challenges we've got today, from social care reform, climate change, homelessness, cost of living crisis. And in all of those issues, do you agree with me that there are dozens of factors way outside the control of a local authority? Do you also agree that there are dozens of factors we can't even see? They're beyond our visibility. Thank you for the thumbs up. If you do agree, then what's the rational response in that kind of environment? That is our lived reality in local government. Because I don't think it's this. I don't think it's sort of doing the hallucinating into the future with false confidence that we know the thing. So what is the answer? Well, here's what I would suggest. And that, first of all, would say, we don't know. We don't know the answer. And in part, this is really difficult for us in local government because, unlike the civil service, where people sort of move around different departments every 18 months, we're encouraged to specialise really early on in careers. And I imagine many of you will feel under quite a lot of pressure to have the answer, to be the expert, to be the person that people go to when they want to know what's to be done. But as I've just described, with the types of issues we address that are unknowable or outside of our control, that's not at all a reasonable expectation. And if people challenge us and say, well, no, we should know our stuff, well, okay, let's point to the local authority. Which local authority anywhere in the UK do we think has nailed all of these big issues, just knocking the ball out the park every time? If we know them, stop listening to me. Let's get on a bus. Let's go and visit them and see what they're doing. But I've been around the block a few times in local government. I haven't met one yet. And I think it's because they don't exist. So if we admit, just say, step one, let's admit we don't know the full answer. But we don't stop here. This would be like being the petulant teenager going, well, I don't know. We've got to do the next step, which is to say, well, what if you may not have the answer, but you, your colleagues, your leadership, your residents will have ideas, assumptions that can be tested. And the idea is to go, well, what if in care we're struggling to deliver enough carers, but what if we enabled neighbours to support their own neighbours in a way collectively with our carers? Does that reduce the human resource requirement? Or could we tackle fly tipping by trying this sort of thing? We've got a hunch this could work, but we don't just stop with the hunch. Again, that's the pub chat. We go into action. And the question is then, what is the smallest experiment we could run to test those assumptions? And by small, I'm not saying a 50 grand pilot. I'm not saying a £3 million change programme. The litmus test, and I think some of you who joined the Nesta session last month, the litmus test is like, what can you test next Tuesday for less than 100 quid? And if people say, well, I haven't got time to think about something next Tuesday, well, then we're thinking too big. It's what is the tiniest, smallest micro experiment that we could test in order to validate some of these hunches, these what if statements. And of course, one what if, one micro test is never enough. And so what we have to do is to put it in that cycle of going, we build a thing, we get it in front of real people, see what they make of it, we learn from their feedback, and we do that again and again and again. And then we become like the ship that's sort of tacking into the wind. You're constantly learning and course correcting. You're feeling your way through to the final answer. You're not leaping to that end goal. It's that constant cycle. And many of you will recognize this if you've read anything on the lean startup methodology. Or indeed, frankly, this is just the scientific method, micro experiments based on hypotheses to see our way through. And so the positive habit is to suggest that every time we try and guess the big end solution, we will almost certainly get it wrong. Is that because we're not smart enough? No. Is it because you're not trying hard enough? No. Is it because we don't care enough? Absolutely not. It's because the world is insanely complex. We can't know the answers. And therefore, the smart thing to do is not guess, but experiment. Okay, so we've got a bit of a methodology. The micro experiment, the feeling our way through. If that's part of the core part of the methodology, what are we experimenting with? Well, here's the second anti-habit, is that we just use the same tools and approaches that we've always used. Let me put it like this. If the approaches that local authorities had used to tackle these big issues that we wrestle with today had been the full solution for those issues, we wouldn't be still trying to wrestle with these problems today, or they certainly wouldn't be in the crisis situation that so many of them feel like they are today. So if you agree with me on that, then what we've actually got to say, so how do we make sure that every local authority has got access to every tool, every method, every approach at their disposal? We want you to be armed up so you're sort of ready for that fight. And in fact, if you look at the Lottie mission statement, it's how do we help every single local authority in London have access to a truly 21st century toolkit. Now, there's a risk with that language. Again, all language comes with some baggage. And the risk with this one is that people instantly think, oh, we're talking about AI, we're talking about technology. It's all just tech and data. That's the solution. And again, there's a risk at the moment that lots of local authorities come to us saying, well, we know we can fix it. We just need a new IT system. Or we've heard the spiel from the vendors, AI is going to fix this bit of social care. Or we just need an app and that will solve things. I suspect all of you on this call today know that we can't just take new tech and data, slap it onto what we already do, and expect to see profound change. If all we're doing is bolting on the new tech and data to the same old ways of working, we're going to get the most superficial level of change. And I think we all recognize we're not in the business of superficial change anymore. Now, one way that we talk about that at Lottie to sort of make that case is we talk about our hierarchy of public sector innovation. And the parallel here, I assume most of you will be aware of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You remember the one where kind of humans' most basic needs are at the bottom, and then self-actualization, the really rich stuff you can do when all the other layers are complete, you do right at the top. In our head, the tech and data are not the foundation layer. They're the bit that turbocharges the rest. And we could pick the example of something like adult social care. And would you agree that in a field like adult social care, unless we've got people with the right relationships out there in our communities, unless we've got staff with the right skills and capabilities, unless we've got the right ways of working and service models, the right policies and incentives, the right assets and resources, no amount of tech and data can make up for those more fundamental things being wrong. But by contrast, if we can get the basics right, all those other layers right, there's almost no limit to what the tech and data can enable us to do. But we've got to deal with the whole pyramid. And if this is sort of looking a bit too wordy and complicated, it boils down to, in any change process, as part of our toolkit, we have to think about people, tech, data, and process. Tech and data are present in almost any modern change. It's going to be there somewhere. We'll be wrestling with legacy baggage there somewhere. But unless we think about the people and the process, the service model bits together holistically, we're going to have a partial solution that's likely to fall over. So key message number one, think about these four elements together. Think about the different things that have to be true to bring about change. A different way of describing this is to say, well, how do you make sure you are using the full toolkit? How do you make sure your teams are thinking as creatively as possible about all the solutions available to them? One way we do this at Lottie is to use our service innovation cards. And my colleague Enter can share a link to a deck which has got all of the different, it goes into this in great depth, and it's an exercise, if you wish to, you can run with your teams. Let me give the brief spiel about it though. And that these are factors, levers, dials that you can change when you are trying to improve a service or a corporate function. The ones in blue are those things that local authorities typically play with. They're the dials, the levers, and factors that you normally try and change. You can change the amount of time, money, staff you chuck towards a problem. You can look at the business model, raise awareness, target them more effectively. And of course, technology and data are part of that toolkit. The ones in pink, though, these are factors that we've spotted social impact organizations around the world tackling big social challenges, having incredible success by being willing to play with some slightly unusual ones. These ones in pink, who's involved, the model, the organization type, the funding method, power, and even playfulness. By playing with those additional ones, adding them to the toolkit, they're able to unlock changes really, really profoundly. I'm going to give you two examples in just one sec. And then finally, these ones in sort of the yellowy orange, these are different roles that we might play as local authorities. So on the left there, you'll be used to being the commissioner of services, the provider of services, the signposter to other services. But what about government being the matchmaker, or incentivizing the solution, or providing the data around it? We'll come on to examples of those different roles that we can play, many of which, incidentally, we saw during COVID. If I could just ask, someone's got their mic live, if you're able to mute that, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. Let me give you two examples to bring this to life, but just to say, we've got the toolkit, you'll see it in the chat, where you can play with these cards. And often the game we play with different teams is to say, pick any three cards, only one of them can be blue, and challenge yourself to think, what would it be like in our service if we change that factor? Sometimes it will come up with nonsense. Other times it will come up with, oh, okay, there's a different thing we hadn't thought of. It shifts people into that more creative gear. I'm going to share my two favorite examples then. My first one is the Good Sam app. If you haven't come across this, let me give you the scenario. So imagine you're at work and someone has a heart attack. You pick up the phone, you dial 999, they dispatch an ambulance to the location. At the same time, though, they will send out an alert via the Good Sam app that will alert any trained first aider within the vicinity of the patient, showing where that person is and where the nearest defibrillators are. And if they can get there first, they might just save a life. And this isn't hypothetical, they have saved lives. What I like about this is that this is not an app that digitized calling 999. It is an app that has augmented the capacity of an entire public service by changing who can be involved, by tapping into a volunteer network. So on our innovation cards, it's changed the process, it's using tech and data, it's changing who can be involved, and it's the public sector playing the role of being a matchmaker. Here's a person in urgent need, here's someone nearby who can help them, and it does that by providing the data to show on the map of where they are. So it's rethinking that role of the public sector and playing with those additional parts of the toolkit. Second one, completely different example, is the Asphalt Art Initiative run by Bloomberg Philanthropies. And the scenario here is in London, we have lots of major traffic junctions, some of which are very dangerous, high collision rates, cyclists, fatalities, etc. What's the traditional transport planner's response? Well, normally we'll stick up more signs, more traffic lights, more road humps. We try and make sure there's lots of signage to slow people down, all those traffic calming measures. By contrast, in this version, what they do is they take away all the signs, they take away all the speed bumps. They spend about 30 grand on paint. They get the whole community out over a weekend, paint a giant mural on the road, as you can see in this image here. And the results are astonishing. They have reductions in fatalities and serious collisions of over 62%. It engages the community. It's aesthetically pleasing. It has these incredibly outsized results with a totally left field approach, playing the role of placemaker, playing with playfulness and changing who can be involved, the whole community, in actually really changing the security and safety of some of their traffic junctions. So what I urge you and your leadership teams is to think about, check with yourselves, whether it's our toolkit or others' toolkits. There's dozens of them. Are you using the full toolkit whenever you're tackling a given challenge? Okay, here's anti-habit number 3, the thing we're saying you shouldn't do. We try to solve problems within our silos. And again, this is classic local government for entirely rational reasons, because silos, we need them. They're the only way stuff gets done. We need to specialize. Silos in themselves are not bad. The problem comes when we are trying to tackle thorny issues that require more eyeballs. Because sometimes we will be in that scenario where our team's specialization means we're all focused in one direction. We're thinking within one domain or one lens. The huge, great problem is right behind us and we haven't even spotted it. And the most extreme example of this I came across was a few months ago, speaking to a local authority in London, where part of their housing team, we had one team over here whose job was to collect rent arrears from social housing tenants. And their KPIs were all about how well they did that. Down the corridor, different part, the same department, were people looking after recently homeless people, some of whom were homeless because they had been chased for rent arrears, with their KPIs around that. Now, within one department, those silos had been blind to the fact they were working essentially against each other. What does that look like when we're facing these huge thorny challenges, like I mentioned right at the start, social care reform, cost of living crisis, these things that have got so many different factors and bits relevant to them? It's rarely going to be within one team or individual's gift to be the full solution to that. And so the simple message on this is the more minds we can bring to tackle a problem, the better. I recently asked on LinkedIn, can you give me examples of problems where solutions were developed which would never have occurred to one team. And again, when we send out some links after this, I will share the link to that chat. There's some really interesting case studies where making sure we've got all those different eyeballs from residents, from other teams, from policy colleagues, service colleagues, elected members, collectively, more eyeballs looking at these complex problems give us a greater chance of succeeding. Anti-habit number 4, the leadership team drives all transformation work. And again, I see a lot of very stressed leaders who have taken it on themselves, thinking they have to be the full solution for reforming their organizations. As you said, local authorities are insanely complex organizations. It's not a reasonable expectation leadership can do that. And in fact, it's not feasible. It's not going to work if that's sort of kept just at that level. And the case study I'd like to share with you on this one comes from Colorado and their DMV. So this is their equivalent of the DVLA, getting your driving license and all things car related. Now, a new manager turned up a few years ago to be the manager of the customer service center for one of the local branches. And she was horrified to hear that the average waiting time was 6 hours. And she said to her other sort of managerial colleagues from other branches, going, what's going on here? Like, what have we done about this? And they said, well, we've done loads of stuff. We got them a big new industrial printer, super fast laser printer, churns out sheets really quickly for all the forms. Okay, that's great. We've implemented one of those ticketing systems. People, pull the paper ticket from the reel, and then when their number comes up, they can go up and they can collect, and they're ready to be served. We've implemented a whole new IT system as well, which is much more slick and shiny and should be more efficient. She's going, well, so why are the waiting times still 6 hours? And so she just asked the frontline staff, the customer contact staff sitting behind those desks, and said, well, what's going on? I said, well, we've got all these measures. Why haven't they worked? And they said, well, yeah, we've got that fancy new printer, but we have to print forms for every customer who comes up. And we're queuing for like about 30 seconds a time because there's a short queue to get there. But 30 seconds times 100 customers each per day times 13 counters times days, weeks, months, like that alone adds up to a huge amount of time standing in a queue. Okay, well, shall we just give you individual little printers? Yeah, okay, let's do that. And that cut down some of the time. And the manager said, well, what about that sort of ticketing system? And they said, well, the problem is because the queue is so long, people aren't going to stick around for 6 hours. They nip out, take a call, buy a sandwich, nip to the loo. They might miss their turn, realize it, and then you get an irate customer coming to the front of the line complaining, and we spend a lot of time dealing with a really difficult customer interaction, trying to calm them down and see how they can be served, and that takes up time because it happens so often. Okay, so should we just do first come, first serve? Yeah, let's do that. And then she said, well, what about this new IT system? And I said, well, the problem is like now all the fields that we have to type in on the computer screen are different from the order of the information that comes in on the paper forms that the customer hands us. So we're flipping between different screens all the time, and that takes longer. So they said, well, can we just change the forms so the information's in the same order as what the software's now got? Yes. And so they did change after change, these micro changes, little by little by little, which because of repetition cumulatively added up to taking it from 6 hours to an average waiting time of 10 minutes. And there's a whole book written about this. I can share the link about how they knock down this time through. It's kind of like when we're thinking these huge mammoth changes, how on earth do we challenge it? I think of like a clock analogy. You look at the hour hand, barely looks like it's moving at all. The only way to shift it, to get it from there to literally facing in the opposite direction, is the second hand ticking. All those micro changes round and round and round, bit by bit by bit, sum up to the profound change we want to see in the end. So to our leadership teams, and maybe this is some of you in your roles, whatever level you are within the organization, as leadership teams, we've got the helicopter view. We can see the strategy, we can see the big picture sometimes, hopefully, and there's huge value in that. But we are often a long way from the coalface and seeing the blindingly obvious problem right in front of us. How do we enable all of our employees to solve the blindingly obvious problem in front of them? Very few organizations I've seen in London have really gone to town on this and seen it through. There's some really great evidence on how to do this well. And again, we can share some links. This is called the field of continuous improvement. You might have heard it in that language elsewhere, but there's really strong evidence. It's amazing for staff morale and better than a pay increase in many cases because people are going, finally, I can actually have some autonomy and sphere of influence as a human being to fix the thing that is often causing me a lot of stress. And I'm the one on the front line getting a lot of the abuse when things don't work. very difficult for management to see. Empowering them can be one of the most powerful things that we can do. Okay, here's the last anti-habit. We demand to know the final solution and the line item budget in advance. And again, I say this often for those leadership teams who are driving those behaviors, but some of us in all different parts of the organization, maybe we're setting that expectation with our own colleagues in some way. Now, back in habit one, remember what we said about what doesn't work about leaping to the big end solution. If we've got organizations that demand to know the thing that's going to be delivered 6 months or a year from now and demand to have the full budget in advance, candidly, I think you've shown me an organization that has made it impossible to innovate. It makes it completely impossible to do those micro experiments that enable us to feel our way through. And I get why people do this. I get why organizations have developed this behavior. It's trying to manage risk, and it's about managing our budgets, managing public funds really responsibly, and particularly in the environment of budget cuts. But I think it's based on a misunderstanding. So let me share this with you, see what you think. So look, this is the traditional local government approach, right? Or certainly in some oversimplified examples, but what you see is we write the big strategy. Remember anti-habit number one, we write a big strategy, specking out the solutions we're going to deliver. We then go, right, this is the thing that we're going to do. We then set up our teams, or we bring in the consultants and say, right, we're funding the change program. Let's deliver this big change program. You make all those changes. We then know we're going to stop it at a certain point in the future, and then we bring all the investment back under control, hopefully in a new business as usual that will be more efficient, better, improved outcomes, etc. So when I'm saying that micro experiment version, leadership teams will look at me and say, well, that sounds really scary and unpredictable because you're trying all these things, you're gradually building your capability, but where does that end? I can't control that. So surely that's worse than our much more controlled change management program. But that, I think, is based on two misunderstandings. Number one, when do you get any user feedback about whether the thing is working? With the micro experiments, we get it if you're doing it properly from the first micro experiment you ever do next Tuesday, right? You're getting it constantly the whole way through. There is never a point along that entire line when you have spent lots of money on something that did not work. The worst you'll have wasted is a few £100, and you won't have wasted it if you're using it to course correct and to learn about what a better answer is. You're testing the assumptions, course correcting to get there. With the big change program, time and time again, and just Google public sector transformation disaster, you will get article after article after article of the huge IT change program, the huge new initiative where the first time any staff or residents got to see it was when just at the point you're dismantling all the apparatus to deliver it. And again, we see this time and time again. The users see it for the first time. They're going, well, the world has changed. I don't need this now. Or, well, that doesn't meet my needs. Or, no, you've misunderstood how this works. And again, the world has moved on. And so that user feedback is critical. The second thing is we've been beaten into the habit in local government of thinking rarely beyond a 1 or 2 year time horizon because of like national government funding mechanisms. We've got financial settlements every year. It's impossible for us to sort of gaze into the distance and figure out what's going to be best because we've been forced to do that. However, if you look on a longer time horizon, the micro experiments will often be the far, far cheaper result. Because if you do the change program, said you have a big initiative, you then close it down, you then realize all the stuff that didn't work, all the stuff that wasn't addressed. And so we have another modernization program, shut it down, realize the bits that didn't work, and therefore need another one. I mean, how many modernization strategies have all of your boroughs had if you looked over the last 10 years? Look at the titles, how many of them look disturbingly similar? And this idea that the world is constantly changing, but in local government, we're stopping and starting in chunks, feels very strange. And one parallel to one anecdote around that, if we want to learn from other sectors, if Google, when they launched the search engine in 1998, what they didn't do was launch it, just leave it, and said 3 years later, well, you probably need a modernization program to modernize the search engine. They have changed the code of the search engine every single day for the last, 27 years almost, because the world adapts, because the needs change, and they've got to make sure it's always there. And if we're saying, well, that's just Google, that's the private sector, that's different. Well, When do any of us think the work of reinventing social care, tackling climate change, tackling poverty, tackling homelessness will ever be done that will have this complete answer at some point in the future? I think this is even more relevant for us in our world. If the world is constantly changing, the smartest thing we can do is to constantly adapt and change course. Of course, the pragmatic approach is that we need both. And if you're going, well, so when do I do the big change program? When do I do the micro experiments? I think I'd urge you to consider where can you, with genuine full confidence, go, we know what has to be delivered. This is certain. We can see cause and effect. We just need to deliver it efficiently. This is really, really valid. This will be true of some of your areas of work. We know this system has to be implemented. It's not a question. Let's plan it, deliver it, and evaluate it really, really thoroughly. But let's also be honest with ourselves as organizations. Where can we not, with true confidence, know what the right answer is? In those scenarios, let's give room to do those micro experiments. And so the leadership message, or the message for any of you when you're talking to your teams, we've got to stop judging teams by how well we tell them to hallucinate into the future and with false confidence tell us the thing they're going to build and what they're going to spend it on. This is basically, to put it bluntly, in telling our colleagues to lie to us when leadership teams demand that. Instead, we judge them by, we're going to tell them this is where we need to end up. This is the desirable desert island in the distance. This is our outcome, our preferred future where we want to go. I will judge your success, team, by how quickly and well you are navigating a course like that sailing ship tacking into the wind, how well you are navigating a plausible path to get there. And if we judge it by that, have you tested our riskiest assumptions? Are you course correcting? This way we end up where we want to, and we don't wake up one day and realize our ship is miles off course, which is the risk with that traditional local government approach. So I will finish up just by saying, the behavior here, I think, is we've got to create the conditions for innovation to thrive. And again, a lot of this is for your leadership teams. If any of you would like help brokering this sort of conversation with your leadership teams, please feel free to get in touch with me. Be delighted to come and speak if you feel any of the above is helpful and we bespoke it and make sure it's really relevant to each organization. But a discussion around these 5 habits, we don't offer them as being the right answer or the complete answer. It's a provocation to see which of these feel relevant to you in your organizations. In a moment, I'll really welcome your questions, comments, thoughts on this. Which of these habits, if any, feel relevant or pertinent to your world? And I'll leave you with the question, what are you going to test next Tuesday? Thank you very much for listening. Let me stop sharing. And if anyone would like to come in, invite you to raise your hands. In a moment, I'll be able to have a look at the comments as well, if there are any. But let me have a look. Amanda, please kick us off.
Hi, Eddie. So I was wondering, how do you take our or how should we take our elected members on this journey?
A great question, and this comes up a lot, actually. And I think one of the most powerful things we can do is to try and have more of a collective conversation, because otherwise, I think the Lottie view on this, I think, is we need organizations to start having a bit of a common language around it, because otherwise one team is talking about innovation and no one else knows what the hell they mean by it, or they think it's tech. Case study, same issue with digital, is why Lottie no longer initiates use of the word digital, because we spend so long trying to explain what we do and don't mean by it. So I think ideally we need some elected members in the same room going, because they, you think about elected members, they came into this not to do bureaucratic management. They came because they cared about something on their street, their local park, their local school. They wanted to see the real world change. I think in many cases they are as frustrated as many of us are at an officer level about how difficult it is to pull it off. And I think them engaging in, so what's the preferred futures they see for the area? Where have we got total confidence and we can just deliver change? Where do we hand on heart not know the right answer? And in which case they kind of need to set a level where we've got permission to try that micro experiment approach. So I don't know the full answer, but I think we have to engage them in this conversation. It is relevant to them, and them being able to talk with us about it would be extremely helpful. Do you agree, Amanda, or does this dynamic play out for you?
No, I do agree. So I was just thinking, how we might take some of this um, into Lambeth, and whether or not some of that leadership engagement, happens with members in the room as well, because I think it's a great, great approach. Thank you.
Thank you. I can see a comment from Paul, and others, please do raise your hand or pop in the chat if you had a question. So Paul is asking, to what extent does the desire for certainty, fake or otherwise, hamstring so much of this? I think it's a real barrier. And again, I think we have to call out where it's not working. I think it was fine if it's like everything is sort of hunky-dory and we're firing on all cylinders, but we could tweak this. I think we've got to be honest as organizations of going like, where are these behaviors not working at all? Like, how's it working out for us right now when we start with false confidence? And as I said, if it hasn't happened in your organization, look at all those other public sector case studies of we had the 3-year IT implementation, designing a whole new system, not a single person used it at the end. So I think we've got to be careful on where are we operating in a context of cause and effect. It's blindingly obvious. We can see some of you on this, if you want to find a framework that can help you with this, the Cynefin framework. It's a Welsh word, hard to spell. I will see if I can, again, sorry, I don't know if you can find the Cynefin framework. If not, I'll see if I can dig out the link and share it afterwards. It basically says, be honest with yourself at the start of a project, what context you're operating in. Are you working in a simple context where cause and effect is blindingly obvious? And this is the wonderful thing about those micro changes. I changed the form, it definitely saves some time and money. Oh, thanks again to that. Oh, sorry, Martin, who popped in the chat, brilliant. Where are you operating in some more, so I forget all the terminology, where is it like really complex, but other people have solved it, and so you're just looking for best practice? Where is it sort of really complicated, where like there's so many factors we don't know, and therefore we have to do the micro experiments? And where do we have just chaos, in which case we just got to do anything? And kind of COVID was a bit like that. Just anything gives us a point of certainty that we can then move on from. So I think challenging ourselves in our teams, but also with leadership, to go like, hand on heart, do we actually know what context we're operating in? Do we have the confidence here? Do we know with certainty? If not, what's the risks? What are all those big untested assumptions that are going to come back to bite us if we do that? One of the particular communities we know we've got to engage with is finance directors. So again, I appreciate under insane pressure given the current funding environment, but often it's them, for all understandable reasons, wanting that certainty in a way that might be hindering the rest of the organization from adapting. So we're looking to see how we can engage them in a really collaborative discussion about how might we do this differently. So that's a few thoughts. I've got a hand up from Diana.
Thanks, Eddie. Really interesting talk. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. My name is Diana, and I'm from City and Hackney. I'm the Public Health Intelligence Lead, just FYI. I was particularly interested in this anti-behavior number 5, I think, or something. And it's to do with asking people to tell you what they're going to deliver. Mm-hmm. And how much it's going to cost before they even started. And for us, obviously, it's a challenge because we do commission large service packages. And so I was interested whether you had any tips, then how do we change our commissioning process so we allow for that flexibility? Because at the moment it's not happening, that there isn't much of flexibility at all.
It's a great question, and so comes into that sort of whole procurement world as well. And I think one of the mistakes we make as a sector is that if you look at a lot of local government tenders where we're commissioning stuff, we have spelt out in exhausting detail exactly what we want organizations to do. Certainly, like in Lottie's engagement with sort of on the technology side, we end up kind of with a 200-page spec that is just a line item description of their current system. It's like, well, who did you expect to respond to that other than your incumbent supplier? And we see that, of course, in services as well, where we've kind of overly prescribed the solution. And the risk with that is, of course, there might be amazing different approaches out there in the world that we have just never come across and are never going to be able to match up with our tender requirements. So we will get the same stuff over and over again. So the bit we need to sort of navigate our way towards is saying, how do we flip it into an outcomes approach? Or we like using the language of like preferred futures. So in this given area, what we want to be different in the world for our residents is this. Like, this is on Nirvana land. If we could write a postcard from the most wonderful place where the life is different, what would we be saying about it? Let's describe, people can do this, they're not faced with that problem, they can easily interact, they can get the support they need when they need it. Okay, who can help us achieve that? And see, how do we encourage those more creative ideas? That does mean we need to change the way we approach it. It means we've got to have the forum to engage with suppliers and others on, okay, how might we tackle this problem? And then when it comes to the actual contract stage, is doing it much more in sort of incremental milestones, where the milestone isn't you complete phase one, which delivered exactly this. It's phase one of navigating, and we're judging it all the time. How well, commissioned organization, are you navigating towards the right solution here? Or you had a big chunk of it, but we know your app or solution or new service model wasn't the whole thing. We needed to accompany it with these other changes. How well are you developing those bit by bit, constantly course correcting, and how plausible at each milestone are we on track for that desirable future? This is a really challenging conversation for us to broker with our procurement teams, but often I think it's making sure whoever is commissioning those services is being really clear on where you want to end up and trying to be as open-minded as possible about how you can get there, releasing funding in tranches so you're minimizing your risk, but not requiring them to spell out the full end thing. Again, with all the caveats around, if you're building a new shopping center, you can't just wing it. You've got some rigorous planning around that. If we're tackling something where the current approach just ain't working, exploring where we can try those new approaches, I think could have a lot of benefit. Just seeing Paul's comment. So yeah, one of the sector's real strengths, professional expertise, is local government's Achilles heel when it comes to considering alternatives. I think this really is true, and this is why, and sometimes this is where maybe Lottie can support some of you in your organisations. We're not consultants, but we're kind of slightly from outside your organisation. Often we're just going like, listen to your own staff. It's that classic, someone from the outside has to point out what that no one knows the answer. So take the pressure off yourself. If none of us know, then let's avoid that false confidence, but we can be really smart with testing our riskiest assumptions and doing it that way around instead. Any other questions? Anyone else want to raise their hand and come in? What I would put to you, I'd love your thoughts on which habit, if any, do you think you would love to see your organization try and develop the most? If anyone either wants to sort of come in with a comment on that or wants to sort of write in the chat, would love to hear like which of those, if any, do you think really resonate? In a moment, I'll just flip that around, and any you just go, Eddie, you're barking up the wrong tree here. That's just never going to work for us. Yeah, could you pop in the chat which of the habits would work best? So I can just quickly recap them. So I realize I've taken down the slides. So habit number 1 was don't guess, experiment. Habit number 2, use the full toolkit. Habit number 3, tackle problems with more minds. 4, enable all staff to solve problems, all those levels. And 5, create the conditions for innovation to thrive, like not doing that's a budget and tell us the final answer. Yeah, could you pop in the chat which, if any, you think would be most helpful for your organization? Interesting. 2 on offering 5. Number 4, Paul. Habit 1, Maddie. Yeah. Simon, I agree. Yes, number 1 does set the tone for the rest. Or if you want to do that, the rest have to come true. All, Diana. Yep. Thank you. Paul, you've put some interesting comments in the chat. I don't know whether you're willing and able to come on mic and share a bit more about habit number 4. Are there any particular areas of local government life where you think that's particularly pertinent, or is this particularly relevant to your world?
It simply strikes me that a huge amount of what local government does is about connecting with the individuals, and why you would look to ignore the perspectives of people who connect with individuals every single day seems a bit bonkers, whether that's homelessness prevention, adult social care, parks and recreation. I could go on. There's so much that we do that's absolutely about human interaction, and assuming the good ideas come from people who are a little bit removed from that human interaction strikes me as really, really foolish.
Yes, I agree. And again, there's the positive spin on this. Certainly, if that behavior is driven by leadership teams, is like this means you don't have to think it's all on you to come up with the answer. And I visited one borough just a couple of weeks ago, and I had their director of adult social care just going, "Oh my God, like was so consumed with thinking it was all on her in that case, and going, well, actually, yeah, my frontline staff, they're going to know the answer to this. Why have I been torturing myself trying to?" She was thinking of something very specific that had clearly been playing on her mind, but hopefully it's quite a relief as well as being a positive thing in and of itself that, yeah, the more minds on the problem, the more we engage all staff, including our residents where relevant, the better we might get to.
We work with lots and lots of clever people and engaged people and people who care. And so why wouldn't you want to tap into that?
Indeed, indeed. Are there any of the habits then that people want to pop in the chat that you think would be really difficult, just you can't even imagine it beginning or how it would start? Any that feel undoable? If not, just as we're drawing to close, got 10 more minutes left if there are questions. If not, you'll see in the chat, I did a blog version of this. I'd encourage you, not saying go read my blogs, but one thing that is in there is a link to a video. It's about a frog. And I think it's the best video on the internet that explains the benefit of the micro experiments approach, where you're going. It's about a guy who's trying to build a frog house. His assumptions about what are going to work don't really play out, but he gets to the right thing by trialing lots of different things and seeing how his end user, the frog, and in fact some unusual users he didn't expect to come along. It's short, it's entertaining, and actually I share that round whenever people are going, so how does this work? Is this compelling? Encourage you to check out the video if nothing else. Having a read of the comments, let's see, Selena said, hello from the GLA, welcome GLA colleagues. The empower all employees to solve problems point really resonates at a team level. One handy tool has helped embed that culture is a team health check. You've got a template for that. That's wonderful. Do every few months, ranking different areas of work and productivity. Really, really great idea. And I think, again, coming back to the Lottie community, Lottie is not a team. There's 10 of us in the team, but we're a community. You guys have the solutions and ideas. If you've got great stuff, really and warmly encourage you to share it. If others can beg, borrow and steal the great ideas that you've got, if you found tools and techniques and approaches that have resonated for you, really see if we can help each other, would be very, very positive. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, folks, if there's nothing else, can I say thank you very much for joining me over your lunch break. Hopefully there's at least a nugget of something useful you can take back to base. If you've got comments or questions, please do get in touch with me and the team. As I said, if you would like a leadership session to engage you and your colleagues or any level of the organisation in a discussion of these habits, delighted to come and visit you and see how we can support. But for now, I wish you a very enjoyable, sunny rest of day. Take care.